Welcome to the Successfully Unemployed show. My name is Dustin Heiner, and I'm here to help you learn how to quit that job, that just over broke job, by any means possible. And today I'm super excited to bring on an entrepreneur, somebody who loves starting businesses, who has many businesses himself, as well as very successful, and has also brick and mortar businesses like actual physical business and online business as well. Super pumped to bring on Casanova Brooks on the show. Casanova, thanks for being on the show, man.
Dustin, thank you for having me. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. And I'm excited to have this conversation.
This is terrific. So I was on your podcast, which is a great podcast. Everybody needs to check it out. But then after meeting, I'm like, man, you need to come on and tell your story, as well as just share with our audience how you make your money without working that dead end job. So Casanova, what do you do to provide for yourself and your family without working that dead end job?
Yeah, I would say at the core of everything, the way that I love to describe it is I build relationships, right? And the reason why I say that is I know that that could be fluffy, and I'll tell you the exact things that I do. But I think at the heart of everything I do, I'm just a relationship builder. So the ways that I bring in income to provide for my family is one, I am the founder and CEO of Dream Nation Media, which is a media company. We focus on podcast production, repurposing content, social media, but also taking that video content and turn it into written content. And so basically a lot of the times us as digital creators, when we have a message, when we have a story, we want to get that out there. We want to interview people, but a lot of the times we can be bogged down on trying to get the content out there consistently and efficiently. And so that's where in the beginning, I was that person, right? I had a podcast and I was starting to get some really quality guests, but I was like, I don't have the time to do the show notes. I don't have the time to continue to do the outreach. I don't have the time to chop up all of the footage and then post it on social media, find the hashtags, everything else. So I hired a team one by one. As my brand started to grow, I started to build more relationships with friends and people who came on the show. And then we got into conversations of, hey, could you do that for me? And I was talking to my team, and it was, yeah, because we built systems and processes that we were able to then do that for other clients. So that's one of the main ways. As you talked about as well, I do have a brick and mortar business, which is a childcare center that my wife and I own. We own the building and we own the business. So that was started in June of 2019. That's been a lot of fun. I don't like to take too much credit for that because that is my wife's vision, her baby. I've been the behind the scenes guy, as you might say, a passive investor in that. While we obviously have done the marketing for the business, which allowed us to grow from 0 to 70 kids in 9 months. And that was right before the pandemic hit, which took us back down to 28. And then we were able to get that back up to 89. And now we just, 4 months ago, bought a building, which allowed us to double our capacity. And then as well, I am a full-time real estate agent and coach. So for that, that's been a lot of fun for me as well, because I kind of got it out of the mud in real estate. And then as I learned, how to find my way through real estate, through building relationships, not only on the agent side, but also on the investing side. A lot of friends, family, and even, clients would see me online and they would say, hey man, I want to start investing in a real estate, or I want to purchase a home. And so again, the same strategies that I applied to my own business, I was able to teach other people. So it's been a lot of fun. I got my hands in a lot of different things. Of course, we talked about the podcast, which I do have a revenue coming in from the podcast. So a lot of fun. Those are the ways, I would say, the top 4 ways that I bring in income for my family.
That's great. And thinking of being not just a business owner, but an entrepreneur, you see opportunities, and you also realize that when you help other people, you help people get what they want, you can create a business doing that and you can make money, but also serve them, which is terrific. Now, what were you doing before all of this? And, we didn't all just, get born and have a business, but we start someplace and we eventually work our way to where we can become successful and unemployed and actually quit our job. Talk to us about that process, and then all the nerves and everything and being able to actually quit.
For me, I had many different jobs as I was growing up. I was raised a little bit about my story. So I was raised by a single mom, south side of Chicago. My grandma stepped in early on to be that father figure in my life because my dad was never in my life. Only child on my mom's side, but last I knew, I had 13 brothers and sisters on my dad's side. So yeah, I always say it's funny because he didn't do anything to bridge the gap or the relationship. So even though I grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters, obviously I was an only child because I never had relationships with any of them. As I was growing up, I was always an ambitious kid. I was never really a troublemaker, but I was that kid that was outgoing, that was very curious. And so as I was getting older, I tried my hand at some of everything. I mean, everything from playing poker for a living for 2 years, online poker. Then it wound up getting shut down. So then I had to move to Canada for 3 weeks before my son was born because that was the only way I knew how to make money. My first real job was being a server at a restaurant, a nicer restaurant. Well, that was what really taught me about building relationships with people, because I quickly started to get people who would come in and they would want to be regulars of mine. And I started to think to myself, like, listen, Dustin, you could have went anywhere in the city on this Friday night, but not only did you come to my restaurant, but you chose to wait for a seat in my section. GM of a pretty big car dealership in the restaurant, and then he became a regular of mine with his family. And one day I went in to get my own car, my first ever car, and he sees me at the table and he says, "Hey," because I was buying the car from my buddy, and he says, "Hey, Casanova," or ask Casanova if he has any interest in selling cars. And so when the guy comes back to the table, I look at my wife, my now wife, but I look at her and I'm like, "No, I'm okay." Well, of course, as all sales managers are, especially car sales managers, he was pretty persistent. And within 6 months, I become car salesman of the month, 2 months in a row. Knowing nothing about cars. And at this time, I'm living in Sioux City, Iowa. I said I was born and raised in Chicago, but now at this time, I'm living in Sioux City. And so I'm selling Kias in the middle of Iowa, where it's mainly pretty American. They only want to talk about their Fords, their Chevys, their Dodges. But I was killing it at that. But again, it was the power of the relationships. And then around this time as well, I get recruited to do network marketing. I learned that for me, within those 9 months that I did it, I learned that the product or service wasn't for me, but the value that I learned out of that network marketing. And what I mean by that, it was the first time I was ever exposed to things like Richest Man in Babylon, Go for No, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which kind of fueled my real estate vision. So one of the guys in the network marketing, he says, "Man, you got to get down to Omaha, which was about an hour and a half away from Sioux City, and you got to get a job where you could just work a little bit of time, but then when you're not working, you can build the business." So I wound up taking a job where I became a digital marketing consultant. Now, really, this company, it was Fortune 500 company, but they were the yellow pages, right? So that's what they were used to, but they were transitioning, right? Because at this time it was 2014. So they were transitioning to trying to become a media company. So that's where they hired me and a whole bunch of other people, like younger people. And so I did that. Within 9 months, I finished as number 8 in the entire company, inside sales. And so I was crushing it. I made more money than I ever had. All the money that I was also bringing in on the phones all day, I was getting 1, 2, maybe 3% of those sales. So I wasn't getting a lot. So at that point, I really felt like if I really wanted to take life by the horns and I wanted to be rewarded for my efforts, at least to the best of my ability, then that means that I needed to go out and I needed to create something on my own. And so at that point, I started going home and talking to my wife, and I came across the real estate video. And the guy says, you got to find a way to be the Lord of your land. And why? Because he or she who owns the land makes the rules. And so that was kind of what sparked it all for me. And the rest is kind of history. And I don't know if there's any other questions or anything you want to tap on in there, but that's how we get to this point.
And you moved from Oklahoma. Now you're living in Texas. Is that correct?
Correct. Omaha, Nebraska. So
Omaha.
a
There
lot
you
of
go.
people know Omaha because of the Oracle, Warren Buffett. So I was brand new
Yep.
to Omaha. So yeah, I moved, and then just 2 weeks ago, I moved down here to Dallas, Texas. So yeah, a lot of transitions for me over these years, but it seems like they keep getting better and better.
So there's actually a podcasting conference next week I'm going to be at in Dallas. It's called Podcast Movement. Have you heard of
Okay.
that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely know. I know Jared and those guys. My head's been so down. Like I said, this transition, this move. But yeah, no, that's phenomenal. I definitely got to look into it for sure.
Yeah, no, I go almost every single year. It's a really good conference, especially if you're a podcaster. I love podcasting. It's just really, really fun. Okay, so with providing for your family, I mean, you have multiple streams of income, which is terrific. You also have actual brick and mortar businesses, which is really, really awesome. And also it can be challenging because you have a lot of overhead with just, electrical, toilets, like everything
Oh
in a
yeah.
business as well as employees as well. But with that, you also have other businesses, which is great, real estate investing. Now, if we're going to look at the digital marketing aspect, like if we want to build a team and not have huge overheads like a physical location, and I love that you buy the actual business, or sorry, buy the building and then you build the business and put it inside the building. That's just brilliant. You're paying yourself, which is great. So
Yeah.
with that, thinking about creating an online business, so let's say digital marketing, where you're helping people who have podcasts repurpose their content, or make sure that they're actually doing what they can do, the best way to reach out to people with making articles, putting things on social media, all that sort of stuff. How did you, like, the biggest thing that comes to my mind is, like, we as entrepreneurs could probably figure out what to do, how to do it. Like, okay, yeah, let's cut this up, put this audiogram, I think what they call it, put it on here, and all that sort of stuff. But the biggest thing is you built a team for yourself first. A lot of people don't think like that, but you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner. You know that you need teams in order to be able to scale your business. Talk to us about, you had your own podcast, but you knew you needed more help. What was the first hire? How did that go? And like, how do we know that we need now to scale by hiring people to work in our business?
So my team has always been remote, right? So that's a huge thing, and probably a benefit to someone listening at this right now is I understand the growing pains. Right now, it's going to be different for me being down here in Dallas because I'm actually looking at hiring a local team, right? So as I get my podcast studio live and everything, it'll be local. But for the last 5.5 years, my team has always been remote. And so, and when I say remote, I mean out of the country. So the Philippines, Argentina, Dominican Republic, India. And I have a team of 11 people right now on my team. So when you ask about what my first hire was, for me, my first hire was the thing that I didn't want to do the most, right? So I think that that's where you start at, because if you start in a podcast, or yeah, let's use a podcast, for example, because people are listening to this, and most likely a lot of people that are listening, they would love to have their own podcast because they like the way that, it flows. So for me, I would look at what is the thing I don't like. If I'm recording on video, if I only want to record, right? If am I doing them individual, as in I have all the episodes, or am I doing interview style, right? So if I'm doing interview style, do I like reaching out to the people? Right. I'm writing down a list of all of the things that I don't like. So that's what I would recommend people do. Right. And first off, if you want to say, okay, well, I don't want to just think about all the things I don't like, write down a list of everything that you do. Right. And then put them into categories of things you do like and things you don't. You might like reaching out to people. I know when I first got started, I did, because it was kind of like the chase of the thrill of the chase. Right. So like I've had some of the biggest names in the world: Grant Cardone, I've had Jack Canfield, I've had Pat Flynn, I've had JLD, I've had a lot of people that I've built genuine relationships with now. For me, that was one of the things that I loved doing. I loved to go find the guests. And what that meant was, I probably couldn't just shoot you an email, especially if you're a big name like Grant Cardone. I had to figure out another way to be able to get in, whether that mean at the time when he's on Clubhouse, whether that means, connecting with his COO at the 10X conference. There's a lot of different ways that you could do it. And so for you, you might say, hey, I don't like reaching out to people. Well, that means I would probably get a VA, right? And I would formulate a strategy on how we reach out to people. Right now, there's going to be a couple of tweaks in there, but try to get something a little bit more templated. And maybe it's not templated in the way the first paragraph on what you're saying to them, but maybe it's more templated in the second paragraph about what it is about you, what makes you stand out, why should they want to come on your show. Right. And so that's what I would do in that way. Then it might even be video editing. Right. So if it's video editing, I would look to try to find a video editor. Right. For me, the first hire that I made was a video editor, because I knew that I didn't want to spend all these hours in Adobe Premiere Pro. I didn't want to spend, because it was going to take time to learn those things. And me, what I really wanted to focus on was asking the right questions and building relationships with my guests. So that was the first hire I made. Now, my video editor, he's still with me to this day. He's been with me now going on 5 years. So it's amazing. And he also helps me run the media company now because of the vision that we've built together. So phenomenal hire that I made there. But yeah, that's what I would say. My first one was a video editor. From there, he started doing social media. Now, social media became a little bit too much to try to chop up the content, figure it all out, and post it. Right. So my next hire was a social media person. Right. And then they helped me to grow the account. They helped me with the engagement. They helped me with all those things. So then it was kind of a three-headed monster. And then from there, I knew that it wasn't just social media that I needed, but I did always like the thought of building out a blog because it was kind of more like compound interest. So in the beginning, it takes a while to get it going, right? For SEO purposes. But once you get that thing rocking, once you're over 10,000, then you can get to 25,000. Even though you don't control the algorithm, right? Because Google could knock you down. We also know that if anybody wants to learn anything, what's the first thing that they do? They Google it, right? And if it's not Google, they go to YouTube, who's owned by what? Google. So I always knew that that was something else I wanted to tap into. And I own the website. So I love that. Whereas in social media, I don't own those platforms. So that was what I did. And those were my first two hires. And then I think eventually became my third was an SEO person.
So you did that for your own business and then also realized that you had other people that wanted this and needed this service as well. And how did you make that transition? Because, I do have a number of virtual assistants that I have for my business, and I just hire them to do like my video editor. That's what he does. He takes care of my videos. He has other clients that he picks on himself or picks up himself. Now I could, because I've had other people, friends of mine or people that have podcasts and YouTube videos and all that sort of stuff say, "Hey, who do you use for a video editor?" I could have said, or what I did say, "Well, I'll use my guy, just let him know, and here's his email." Instead, it seems like what you did was say, "Well, man, why don't I just start another business? Because I could serve people now. I have the infrastructure, I have the systems, and everything set up that they just hire me." How do you make sure that your employees that are working for you now, that you're charging the customer the right amount and paying your employees the right amount? How do you make sure that you're like, is there like a 10% on top of what you pay or 50% or whatever it might be? How do you make sure that you're pricing accordingly and still being able to pay your employees?
For me, what I thought about in the beginning was um, Dream Nation Media manages Casanova Brooks brand the same way they would manage, Jack Canfield's brand, right? So I'm still paying. So regardless, all my people for the most part, like I have them either on a salary or a per video, per blog, or something like that basis. So I try not to have to get into too much hourly. That's my preference, but obviously every method may vary. So I think in the beginning, what that did for me was it didn't matter if they were working on my project or if they were working on someone else's project. It kind of kept it even across the board. And I think the other thing was for me, I understood that early on I needed to be able to pitch a vision because 95% of independent contractors, whether they're a video editor, a blog writer, or SEO person, or whatever, they constantly have to go looking for new clients, right? They don't think of them, they don't think of this as a career. They're just seeing the fact that they get to work from home, they get to control their own schedule, and so they're getting basically gigs, right? They get a different project. So for me, I think early on, I pitched the vision of, hey, you love me as a client, you love getting paid by me. Well, what about if we work together and we go find more clients, and then we'll keep the same, and as the revenue grows for the company, obviously that means that we can also talk about how do I reinvest more of that back into you as well as the rest of the team and get better resources, get better systems, because right now we already have one, but at the same time it's only based off of 1 2 clients, right, as opposed to 7 8 9 10 clients. And so they love that. And everybody loves the bigger picture, because for the most part when you're in solopreneur world. We want to say entrepreneur, but a lot of people don't make it to that because they stay solo, they stay small, right? And they're the people who have to do all of the tasks. And one of the things I learned, even in the real estate world, which has always stuck with me and it will always stick with me, is if you do not have an assistant, guess what? You are the assistant,
You
right?
do all the work. Yep.
You do all the work. So for me, that was very big in understanding that, I needed to be able to take more things off of my plate. And one of the things that I've always told my team is, how will you replace yourself? right? So what does that mean? That means that you have to be thinking about systems and processes that you can create. So when we bring someone else in, doesn't mean that it replaces you. It means that it allows you to focus on higher level tasks, right? So that's how you replace yourself out of this position. And obviously, the bigger the problems you could solve, the more value that you bring and the more money that you warranted. So that's kind of always been the process for me. And that's something that I've learned over the day, but I think that that's tried and true, and anybody can be able to build a reputable team and even another business off of that.
So do the employees that you have that are working under the business, so you have, is it Dream Nation? Is that the one that's the digital company and they're
Dream
hired
Nation
underneath that
Media is, yeah. So
media?
Dream Nation is the podcast, but think of Dream Nation. So there's the Dream Nation podcast. The way that I have it built out is Dream Nation is really the empire, right? So Dream Nation is everything, there's spokes underneath it. Think about Berkshire Hathaway, right? That's Dream Nation is synonymous with that. Well, when you think about real estate, you have Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, right? So that's that second part. So you have Dream Nation Media or Dream Nation and then media. So that's that one. But then you have the Dream Nation and then you have podcasts. And so and then we have like clothing. We have a lot of different, ancillaries when it comes to the business. So yeah, Dream Nation Media is the media company that helps with repurposing content, podcast content, all of that.
That's great. So is there a way with digital marketing to grow a podcast? And what would that be? Because as I'm looking at, so my podcast, I'm thinking, well, if I just put it out there, hopefully, iTunes or Spotify will send people there. And there's also the thought like you could cut up little snippets and put it on social media, but I don't know if that's the best. There's also ads. You could, run Facebook ads to get people to listen to your podcast. What would you suggest be a good way that we can grow our podcast as opposed to just waiting for iTunes or Spotify to send people to us?
Yeah, so I think you got to think about where is your audience. A lot of the times, if you're just talking about Spotify or iTunes, and I was guilty of this in the beginning as well, thinking that just because we have a podcast, we do not have to invest into ourselves, right? So what I mean by that is, if you have a funnel, right, and if you want to get traffic to your funnel, what are you going to do? Most of the time, you're going to go pay for ads. Right. A lot of the times now you can grow it organically by getting a Facebook group or Discord group or something like that, but that's going to go slower, right? Name a successful business out there that does not invest in marketing or any type of advertising. So if you have a podcast, it's the same thing. Yes, when you start let's say a local brick and mortar business, yes, you can put that in a chamber of commerce, but what does that mean? It doesn't mean you still need 10, 15 years ago, you still needed yellow pages. Now you still need a website. You need social media channels. You need ads. It's the same thing with the podcast, right? You just have a different vehicle that you're trying to move through. And so that's what I would say. The first thing that I would do is I would look at ads, right? And I would look at ads where other people are already listening to successful podcasts. The other thing that I would do, and the reason why I said ads before doing this is because I think that ads can definitely get you a better return, and it's a lot more feasible. And so number two is going to people who already have an audience, which is great, right? Getting somebody like a Pat Flynn, these are all the things I tried in the beginning, which was great. The only issue, so that gains you credibility because when people come to your show, they're saying, oh, you've already had all these people on there. That's great. But the issue is, the reason why people started doing that in the beginning was not only for the collaboration and the relationship building, but at the same time, hopefully getting that person to then share your content right in front of their audience. But that's become a lot harder because now a lot more people are focused on creating all of this micro content, and they might share a story or two, but it's a lot harder now because a lot of people are doing even podcast tours now. Right? You got a book launching. It's no longer that you're going to go city to city. You'll do podcast tours to get in front of people. So it's a lot harder to get people to share your content unless it was something that they loved that they said on your show. Right? It has to be something where they felt really good about it. And even with that, I mean, a lot of times it can just get lost in the shuffle because they've done now 4 or 5 other shows as well. And they don't want to feel like that they're overbearing their audience. So that's why I like ads, is because when people are listening to relevant podcasts, especially podcasts that are inside of your niche, right, at the top podcasts, I think that then if people, let's say it's real estate, right? A lot of people listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast or Rich Dad Poor Dad, radio show or any of those. And so if you have something that's along those lines, let's say Bigger Pockets, but you dive deeper into your blue ocean, which is multifamily, or something along the lines of Storage Wars, where you talk about storage, something like that. And people are into that stuff because they've heard a Bigger Pockets podcast. Now, when they hear your 30-second clip, that tells them, hey, I can go deeper into this. And then, so that's what I would say is the fastest way to grow. But of course, using social media can help you as well. If you can catch a couple clips that can go viral on a TikTok or a LinkedIn.
I love the idea of literally all of the above. The only thing I haven't done so far is really putting any ad money towards it, like, Facebook or um, uh, being on another podcast where I'm buying as an ad spot on there. Now I've been on, oh my goodness, in the last like 5 months, 6 months, I've been on at least 60 or 70 different podcasts. And so you're 100% right. It's really hard to get podcasters to share because they're more than likely, if they're any good, they're going to be on lots of podcasts and they just can't share every single one. The people that are following me be like, oh my goodness, another one, another one, another one. And they're not going to be that happy. And so it's much harder to get them to share. And so we got to think of how can we not organically, that's not the right way to say it. How can we, with organic, with paid advertising, with being strategic in using social media, like all of the above, how do we make sure that we grow our business? And so with that, what would you suggest for somebody who is saying, I want to create a business where I service other people? Because that's what you do. You serve other people. You make sure that everybody else is getting what they want. Is there a certain idea that maybe strikes them? Because you had a need, you saw the need, you started building it out, and then you found out other people had the same need. So let me start serving that out to people, build a company that can serve them. What would you suggest if somebody's wanting to get started in service and they don't really know what it is that they could do to serve other people? What would your suggestion be for them, not just to get started, because they want to get started, but how do they know what area they should start serving in?
What are you good at? And what do people tell you wow or even thank you in the same sentence for? So nowadays, in the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen that you can literally do anything and make money if you have enough passion behind it and you're willing to show up every single day, right? So for some people, I would say if you don't love to talk to people, it's probably not podcasting, even though you couldn't make $1 million a year off of podcasting, right? But if you don't like to talk to people, and here's what I'll say about podcasting as well. Podcasting is such in its infancy stage, but what makes podcasting so powerful is 90% of podcasters are indie podcasters, right? But think about it. A lot of the times when here's the thing this clicked to me like 3 months ago. And think about this. When you want to become a movie star, what did you have to do?
You joined you go to Hollywood and you try to find people that are doing it.
You try to find people that are doing it, but then you want to try to find a big film director, right? A big agent. You wanted somebody on your team that believed in you, that could help you land a big deal. Now, the cool thing about the era and the time that we live in now is you don't need to, but that's not to say that those channels are not still valuable. So for some people out there, they're saying, man, I got a lot of content. I got a really good show, but I'm not bringing in that type of income, right? But have you ever thought about partnering with a big advertising firm? Have you ever thought about partnering with somebody like that can put those marketing dollars behind you, right? If you don't have it, right? And then, yes, maybe you're giving up a little bit of percentage, but if you have a good attorney that can negotiate that for you, if you're not being cheap, right? Because it's only going to be a one-time fee. Most likely you get the contract drawn up. And if you get to keep the name and the intellectual property, but they get X amount of profits, and maybe you do it for the first 2 years, assuming they get this, then you get 80%, they get 20%, or however you do it. But that's where I hear a lot of times people are like, they quit podcasts because what do they say? Podcasts don't make it past like the 15th episode, right? Like 90% of podcasts don't make it past the 15th episode.
They really don't give it enough time in the end.
Because people only seen the income reports from Pat Flynn or JOD or those type of guys. And they're saying, man, and I know because I was one of those people in the beginning, right? But for me, luckily, I really like people and I like building relationships, that it wasn't all about the money. But it's hard when you're seeing it and you're saying, listen, I could get paid 6 figures a year just by talking to people. Right. And that's something that's very, tough to get out of your mind. So those are the things that I would tell people to really strongly look at. If you have an idea, podcasting is no different than anything else, right? Pitch it to somebody who, think about, if you want to get in a real estate deal, right? But you don't have the capital, what do? You have, first off, you got to find the deal. If you have the deal, you control everything. But you don't have the capital. What do? You go find somebody with the capital. If you don't have the credit, what do? You go find somebody with the credit. If you don't have the expert. So that's what you do. Right now, you have the podcast. So if you don't have the funds to get that show out there and get more people knowing about it, if you know you have a great product, go find somebody who has the funds that can back you. As this money comes in, which it will, because what? Every business needs what? Traffic. They need eyeballs. They need ears. It doesn't matter if it's McDonald's, if it's Coca-Cola, if it's Berkshire Hathaway. That's why you can drive down the street and you're seeing billboards. That's why you're seeing digital billboards, right? So every place needs traffic, and they're willing to pay for the person that can bring them the traffic. So if you can't bring the traffic right now because you don't have the capital, you need to go find somebody to partner up with that can help you bring the capital, right? So then you can get more traffic. And then what? That means more businesses are going to want to get in front of you.
Is Facebook ads, do those work well to get people to go to a podcast? Or are you thinking on somebody's podcast, get an ad spot inside of that podcast so they hear, oh, now go check out this podcast now? Is that better, or would Facebook work just fine?
So I am a proponent of getting in front of other podcasts. Why? Is because the listeners are already there. With Facebook, obviously the algorithms change all the time, and you really need a pretty strong clip. Plus you need a pretty good guest that can make people stop. Obviously you got to hook them. You need a little bit of a story, and then you need an offer of why they should, click on your website or subscribe to your podcast. Because there's so many people that still don't even know how to listen to a podcast, right? Like, I mean, I still talk to people daily that say, well, how can I find it? What do I got to do? Right. So I like going in front of people that are already listening to podcasts. I tried probably a year and a half ago. I tried Facebook ads for the podcast, and I didn't see the results that I was looking for. So if I'm going to advertise, I'm going to advertise on some of these podcast networks to get me in front of, actual people who are listening to podcasts.
Man, Casanova, I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge, and also your podcast is fantastic. People definitely need to check that out. How can people find you and listen to your podcast, reach out to you, and see what you've been up to?
Yeah, so CasanovaBrooks.com, CasanovaBrooks, CasanovaBrooks.com. That leads into everything. You can also go to DreamNation.com. Casanova Brooks is kind of that centralized funnel, but DreamNation.com, they both kind of interchange with one another. They're all the part of their family. So that's where you can listen to it. My podcast is the Dream Nation podcast. And I'm pretty accessible on social medias as well. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I always love people to be able to reach out to me, especially if they heard me on this show, because I love to be able to show love back to friends and family who invite me on their show. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you letting me be on your show as well. Hopefully we can just continue to serve and help more people. So again, thanks a lot, man.
Yes. In the dream we trust.